Enjoy the swim with the sharks, my husband whispered in my ear before his hands pressed hard against my back. The next thing I knew, I was falling. The ocean rushed up to meet me, cold and dark, swallowing me whole. Salt water filled my mouth as I struggled to the surface, gasping, my lungs burning. When I finally broke through, the yacht was already pulling away, its engine roaring louder with each second. I could see them on the deck, my husband Bradley and his mother Eleanor, watching me thrash in the water. Eleanor's laughter carried over the waves, shrill and delighted, like this was the best entertainment she'd had in years. My name is Lindsay. I'm 32 years old, and I just realized my husband tried to kill me. The water was freezing. My clothes dragged me down, heavy and unforgiving. Every kick felt like pushing through concrete. I couldn't believe what had just happened. We were supposed to be on vacation, a relaxing trip to celebrate our 3rd wedding anniversary. Bradley had suggested we take his mother along, said she'd been lonely since his father passed. I hadn't wanted her there, but I agreed because I thought it would make him happy. I thought a lot of things about Bradley that turned out to be wrong. The yacht grew smaller in the distance. They weren't coming back. That much was clear. My arms ached as I treaded water, trying to stay afloat, trying to think. The Florida coastline was somewhere behind me, but I couldn't see it. Just endless ocean in every direction. Panic clawed at my throat, threatening to pull me under faster than the water ever could. I'm a biotechnology entrepreneur. I built my company from nothing, turned it into a $2.5 billion empire. I've faced hostile takeovers, patent wars, and investors who thought a woman couldn't run a pharmaceutical company. I've stared down boardrooms full of men who wanted to see me fail. But none of that prepared me for this moment. Alone in the ocean, abandoned by the man I'd trusted with everything. Bradley and I met 5 years ago at a medical conference in Seattle. He was charming, attentive, working as a consultant for healthcare startups. He said all the right things, made me laugh when the stress of running my company felt overwhelming. He seemed different from the opportunists who usually circled around successful women, looking for an easy ride. I was so wrong about that. His mother Eleanor never liked me. From the moment we met, she made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She'd grown up wealthy, married into more wealth, and believed money was something you inherited, not earned. The fact that I'd built my fortune through actual work offended her on some fundamental level. She called me new money, like it was a disease. She told Bradley he was marrying beneath himself, but he married me anyway, and I thought that meant something. I thought love had won. The water felt colder now. My fingers were going numb. I forced myself to keep moving, to keep my head above the surface. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was screaming that I was going to die out here. But another voice, the one that had built a billion-dollar company against all odds, refused to accept that. I thought about the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed. Bradley had been different lately, more distant. He'd started asking questions about my business, about the structure of my holdings, about what would happen to everything if something happened to me. I'd thought he was worried about the future, about protecting what we'd built together. Now I understood he'd been planning this, planning how to take everything from me. Eleanor had been in on it too. That became obvious when I replayed the morning in my head. She'd insisted I come up on deck to see the dolphins. Bradley had been waiting there, his face unreadable. When I stood at the railing, looking out at the water, I'd felt his presence behind me. And then those words in my ear, so cold and casual, like he was commenting on the weather instead of ending my life. A wave crashed over my head, and I swallowed more salt water. My throat burned. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't stay afloat much longer. But then I saw it, a fishing boat in the distance, maybe half a mile away. It was my only chance. I started swimming. Every stroke felt impossible, but I kept going. The fishing boat grew larger. I could see people on deck. I tried to shout, but my voice was gone. swallowed by the ocean and exhaustion. I waved my arms, splashing, desperate to be seen. Someone pointed in my direction. The boat changed course, heading toward me. Relief flooded through my body, giving me just enough strength to keep my head above water. They were coming. I was going to survive this. As the fishing boat pulled alongside me, and strong hands reached down to haul me out of the water, I made myself a promise. Bradley and Eleanor thought they'd won. They thought I was dead, thought they'd get everything I'd worked for. They had no idea what was coming for them. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to destroy them both. The fishermen who rescued me were a father and son team from Miami, out on an overnight fishing trip. They wrapped me in blankets, gave me hot coffee, and asked if I needed a hospital. I said no. What I needed was a phone and a way back to shore that wouldn't involve any official reports. The father, whose name was Thomas, looked at me with understanding in his eyes. He'd seen enough in his 60 years to recognize when someone didn't want questions asked. "You running from something?" he asked quietly, while his son piloted the boat back toward the coast. "Running toward something," I corrected. "Revenge." He nodded like that made perfect sense. Maybe it did. His son lent me his cell phone and I made 3 calls. The first was to my head of security, a former FBI agent named Patricia who'd been with my company since the beginning. The second was to my lawyer, a shark named Gregory who specialized in the kind of legal warfare I was about to wage. The third was to my closest friend and business partner, a brilliant chemist named Diana, who'd helped me build our pharmaceutical empire and who would move mountains to help me now. I told them what Bradley and Eleanor had done. I told them I needed to get home without anyone knowing I was alive, and I told them to prepare for war. By the time the fishing boat reached a private dock Diana owned, she was waiting with dry clothes, a burner phone, and a car with tinted windows. She hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack, tears streaming down her face. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "When Bradley called the Coast Guard, reported you'd fallen overboard and drowned, I thought I'd lost you. He called the Coast Guard. That was bold. Stupid, but bold. 2 hours ago. Said you were taking photos, leaned too far over the railing, fell before he could grab you. The Coast Guard is searching the area now." Diana's voice was bitter. He even cried on the phone. Very convincing performance. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Bradley was already playing the grieving widower, which meant he was moving fast to secure my assets before anyone could question too hard. Under our prenuptial agreement, which I'd insisted on despite his protests, he wouldn't inherit directly. But if I died, my company shares would be tied up in probate, and as my widower, he'd have significant influence over the interim management. Enough to embezzle, enough to destroy what I'd built, enough to make himself and his mother rich before anyone caught on. But here was the thing Bradley didn't know. I'd updated my estate documents 6 months ago. A nagging suspicion about his sudden interest in my finances had made me take precautions. Now, if I died, everything would be locked in an irrevocable trust controlled by Patricia and Gregory, with Diana as the backup executor. Bradley wouldn't see a dime. He'd be investigated thoroughly before receiving anything. I hadn't told him about the changes because I'd still hoped I was wrong about him. I wasn't wrong. I just hadn't realized how far he was willing to go. Diana drove me to a safe house she kept for exactly these kinds of emergencies. Every successful businesswoman in a cutthroat industry had contingency plans for corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, and personal threats. I just never imagined I'd be hiding from my own husband. Inside the safe house, Patricia was waiting with Gregory. They'd already begun pulling together what we'd need. Security footage from the yacht's GPS tracker showed its exact route. Bradley had disabled the yacht's cameras before we left the marina. Another damning piece of evidence. Phone records showed calls between Bradley and Eleanor over the past 3 months that matched perfectly with the timeline of his questions about my estate. But the real gold mine was in the financial records Patricia had pulled. My security chief had access to everything, part of her job protecting me from corporate theft. What she found made my blood run cold. Bradley had been stealing from me for over a year. Small amounts at first, carefully hidden through a web of shell companies. But the theft had accelerated in recent months. He'd taken nearly $15 million from various accounts, always staying just below the threshold that would trigger automatic audits. "He's been planning this a long time," Gregory said grimly, spreading printouts across the table. "These shell companies are registered in the Cayman Islands, but I traced them back to accounts controlled by Eleanor. She's been helping him hide the money." "How much more was he planning to take?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Everything," Patricia said flatly. "He set up a scheme to liquidate your personal holdings after your death. With the right forged documents and Eleanor's social connections in the banking world, he could have transferred billions before anyone realized what was happening. The investigation would have taken years, and by then, the money would be untraceable." I sat down hard in one of the chairs, the full weight of the betrayal hitting me. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. Bradley had courted me, married me, pretended to love me for 5 years, all so he could rob me and leave me for dead in the ocean. And his mother had helped him every step of the way. Diana squeezed my shoulder. "We're going to make them pay for this. What do you want to do?" I looked at the evidence spread across the table. The GPS data showing where Bradley had pushed me overboard. The financial records proving theft. The call logs showing conspiracy. I had everything I needed to send them both to prison for decades. But prison was too clean. Too simple. I wanted them to feel what I felt in that ocean. Helpless, terrified, watching everything they valued slip away while they couldn't do anything to stop it. "I want to go home," I said quietly. "I want to be there when Bradley walks through the door." My house sat on 3 acres in Coral Gables, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel that overlooked the bay. I'd designed it myself, every detail perfect, every room a testament to what I'd accomplished. Bradley had loved it when we moved in after the wedding. He'd loved a lot of things about my success back then: the house, the cars, the private jet, the social status. What he'd never loved was the work it took to build those things, or the woman who'd done the building. Patricia drove me through the private gate after dark. The house was blazing with lights. Through the windows, I could see movement inside. Bradley and Eleanor were home, probably celebrating, probably already spending my money in their heads, planning their wealthy future. The thought made me smile, cold and sharp. "You sure about this?" Patricia asked as she parked in the shadows near the guest house. "We could handle this through legal channels. Cleaner that way." "Nothing about this is going to be clean," I told her. "But it will be thorough." We'd spent the afternoon planning every detail. Gregory had filed emergency motions with 3 different judges, freezing all accounts associated with Bradley and Eleanor, including the shell companies. By morning, they wouldn't be able to access a single dollar. He'd also drafted criminal complaints and delivered copies to the district attorney, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The investigation would start immediately, even before Bradley knew I was alive. Diana had used her connections at the company to lock Bradley out of every system, every database, every piece of information he might try to access or destroy. His employee credentials were revoked, his email account suspended, his keycard deactivated. If he tried to enter our offices, security would escort him out. She'd also alerted the board of directors about the theft, and they'd voted unanimously to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. But those were just the practical moves. What I had planned for tonight was personal. I walked up to my own front door and used my key. The alarm didn't beep. Bradley must have disarmed it. Careless of him. I moved silently through the marble foyer, following the sound of voices to the living room. They were drinking my wine, $20,000 bottles from my private collection, toasting each other with crystal glasses. "To Lindsay," Bradley said, raising his glass with a grin. "May she rest in peace and ignorance." Eleanor laughed, That same shrill sound I'd heard from the yacht. I still can't believe you actually did it. I thought you'd lose your nerve at the last second. It was easier than I expected, Bradley said casually, like he was discussing a business transaction instead of murder. She trusted me completely, never suspected a thing. Even when I asked about her will, she just smiled and said she wanted to make sure I was taken care of. He shook his head, amused by my stupidity. She actually thought I loved her. Women like that always do, Eleanor said, settling deeper into my leather couch. They make their fortunes, think they're so smart, but they're desperate for validation from a man. You just had to play the part long enough. And now everything she built belongs to us. Well, to you mostly, Bradley corrected. I'll be the grieving widower who can't handle the business alone. You'll step in as interim CEO through your board connections. We'll quietly liquidate everything over the next 2 years. And then we're set for life. By the time anyone figures out what happened, we'll be living in Switzerland with new identities and more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. I stepped into the room. Interesting plan, just one problem. They both froze, glasses halfway to their lips, staring at me like I was a ghost, which I supposed I was supposed to be. Bradley dropped his glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, red wine spreading like blood across the polished surface. His face went absolutely white, then green, like he might vomit. Eleanor made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a scream, her hand flying to her chest. Lindsay, Bradley breathed. We saw you drown? I finished calmly, walking further into the room. Yes, you did try very hard to make that happen. Unfortunately for you, I'm an excellent swimmer. State champion in high school, remember? You really should have done more research before attempting murder. Eleanor found her voice first, though it came out shaky and thin. This is absurd. You fell overboard. Bradley called for help immediately. We've been devastated, absolutely devastated. Save it, I cut her off. I know everything. The shell companies in the Cayman Islands. The $15 million you've stolen so far. The plan to liquidate my assets after my death. The phone calls between you two over the past 3 months, coordinating every detail. I pulled out my phone and held it up. I have proof of all of it. Financial records, GPS data from the yacht showing exactly where Bradley pushed me overboard. Even the recording from this afternoon when you disabled the yacht's cameras. Patricia installed backup systems you didn't know about. We have everything. Bradley stumbled backward, knocking into an end table. An expensive vase toppled and smashed. He barely noticed. We can explain. Explain attempted murder? I asked pleasantly. Explain theft, conspiracy, fraud. Please go ahead. I'm sure the FBI will be fascinated by your explanations when they arrest you, which should be happening in approximately 3 minutes, by the way. They're waiting outside for my signal. Eleanor's face twisted with rage. The fear disappeared, replaced by something uglier. You think you're so clever, don't you? Coming back from the dead to catch us. But you can't prove any of this in court. It's your word against ours, and we'll tell everyone you staged this whole thing for attention, that you're mentally unstable. That might have worked, I interrupted, if I hadn't recorded your entire conversation just now. The part where Bradley admitted pushing me overboard was particularly useful. Thank you for that. Bradley's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the floor, his face in his hands. Eleanor just stood there, frozen, finally understanding that they'd lost everything. I smiled at them both. My husband who'd tried to kill me, my mother-in-law who'd helped him plan it. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said sweetly. It's the last one you'll spend as free people. Then I walked to the door and signaled Patricia. Within seconds, FBI agents poured into my house. The FBI took Bradley and Eleanor into custody that night. I watched from the doorway as they were handcuffed and read their rights, their faces pale and shocked. Bradley kept looking at me like he couldn't understand how this was happening. Eleanor tried to maintain her dignity, lifting her chin and refusing to look at anyone, but her hands were shaking. They were loaded into separate vehicles and driven away, and then my house was finally quiet again. Patricia stayed with me that first night. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee at 3 a.m, neither of us able to sleep. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, making my hands tremble and my heart race. I kept replaying the moment I'd fallen into the ocean, the cold shock of the water, the certainty that I was going to die. Then I'd remember Bradley's face when he saw me alive, the absolute terror in his eyes, and something dark and satisfied would settle in my chest. "You okay?" Patricia asked, watching me carefully. "I don't know," I admitted. "Is it wrong that I enjoyed watching them get arrested? That I wanted to see them suffer?" She shook her head. "They tried to kill you and steal everything you built. You're entitled to whatever you're feeling right now." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But you need to prepare yourself. This is just the beginning. The trial, the media attention, the investigation into every aspect of your life and theirs. It's going to get worse before it gets better." She was right. By morning, the story had broken. Someone had leaked details to the press, and my attempted murder was headline news. The phones started ringing before sunrise. Every major network wanted an interview. Reporters camped outside my gate. My company's stock initially dropped on the chaos, then surged when investors realized I was alive and the company was safe. The board issued a statement supporting me fully and condemning Bradley's actions. Diana came over that afternoon with lunch and moral support. We sat in my study, away from the windows where photographers were trying to get shots with telephoto lenses. She'd brought Thai food from my favorite restaurant and a bottle of wine, though neither of us had much appetite. "The company is fine," she assured me. "Better than fine, actually. Our competitors thought we'd be vulnerable with you gone, started making moves to poach our researchers and steal our contracts. Now they're backpedaling hard, trying to pretend they never doubted us." She smiled grimly. "Your near-death experience has actually strengthened our market position. Nothing says commitment like surviving a murder attempt and coming back swinging." I laughed, though it sounded hollow. "Glad my trauma is good for business." "That's not what I meant." Diana's expression softened. "I'm just saying you don't need to worry about the company. We've got everything handled while you deal with this legal nightmare. Take whatever time you need." But I didn't want time. I wanted to work, to focus on something other than the fact that my husband had tried to kill me. I wanted to feel normal again, though I suspected normal was something I'd never quite achieve. "How did you go back to regular life after discovering the person you loved most in the world had been planning your murder?" Gregory called that evening with updates. "The district attorney is moving fast. They want to charge Bradley and Eleanor with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. The evidence is overwhelming. Both their lawyers are already talking about plea deals." "No deals," I said immediately. "I want them to face trial for everything they did." "Lindsay, think about this carefully. A trial means months of your life consumed by court proceedings. It means testifying in detail about your relationship with Bradley, having every aspect of your marriage examined publicly. Their defense attorneys will attack your credibility, suggest you're lying or exaggerating. They'll try to paint you as a controlling, paranoid businesswoman who drove Bradley to desperation. It won't be pleasant." "I don't care," I said firmly. "They tried to kill me, Gregory. They planned it for months, stole millions, and would have taken everything if I'd actually died. I want a jury to hear exactly what they did. I want it on public record." He sighed but didn't argue further. "All right. I'll inform the district attorney's office that we're rejecting any plea negotiations. Prepare for this to get ugly." He had no idea how ugly it would become. 2 days later, Eleanor made bail. Her lawyers argued she was elderly, had no criminal record, and posed no flight risk. The judge agreed, setting bail at $5 million. Eleanor posted it immediately. Apparently she had money hidden that we hadn't found yet. She walked out of jail looking righteous and angry, straight into a crowd of reporters. "My son is innocent," she announced to the cameras, her voice strong and clear. "Lindsay is mentally unstable. She's always been jealous of our close relationship, always trying to drive a wedge between Bradley and his family. She staged this entire thing to frame us because Bradley finally stood up to her controlling behavior. The truth will come out in court, and everyone will see what kind of person she really is." I watched the press conference from my study, feeling something cold and heavy settle in my stomach. Eleanor wasn't just defending herself. She was going on the offensive, and she was good at it. Decades of social connections, charity work, and careful image management had made her a respected figure in certain circles. She knew how to play the victim, how to make herself sympathetic. The media coverage shifted almost immediately. Suddenly there were articles questioning my version of events. Opinion pieces about wealthy women who weaponized accusations against men. Interviews with people who barely knew me, claiming I was cold, calculating, obsessed with control. Someone dug up an old business rival who'd sued me years ago, a lawsuit he'd lost spectacularly, and he went on television claiming I'd destroyed his company out of spite. Bradley's bail hearing was set for the following week. His lawyers filed motions arguing he should be released pending trial. They submitted character references from friends and colleagues, including 3 executives from my own company who apparently thought Bradley was charming and couldn't believe he'd harm anyone. It made me sick to read their statements, knowing they were defending someone who'd literally pushed me into the ocean to die. Patricia increased security around my house and office. She'd received credible threats, anonymous messages saying I deserved what happened, that I was lying about everything, that someone should finish what Bradley started. The threats were forwarded to the FBI, but they did nothing to ease the knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. "Eleanor is orchestrating this," Patricia told me. "The media campaign, the character witnesses, probably even the threats. She's trying to poison public opinion against you before trial." "Can we prove it?" "Working on it. But she's smart enough to keep herself insulated. Everything's going through intermediaries, shell companies, supposedly independent PR firms." Patricia's expression was grim. "She's been planning this contingency, Lindsay. The moment she and Bradley got caught, she activated a backup plan to destroy your credibility. She's fighting for her life now, and she's using every weapon she has." I stared out the window at the reporters still camped beyond my gate. They'd been there for days, waiting for a statement, a photo, anything to feed the story. I'd been hiding in my own house like a prisoner, while Eleanor walked free and painted me as the villain. "I need to fight back," I said quietly. "How?" I turned to Patricia, and she must have seen something in my expression because she actually took a step back. "We find everything. Every dirty secret Eleanor's been hiding, every lie she's told, every crime she's committed. She wants to destroy my reputation. Fine. Let's see how hers holds up under scrutiny." Patricia smiled slowly. "Now we're talking. Give me 48 hours. Patricia delivered in 36 hours. She came to my house with 3 banker's boxes full of documents and a laptop with enough dirt on Eleanor to bury her 10 times over. "Your mother-in-law," Patricia said, spreading files across my dining room table, "is not the respectable society matron she pretends to be. She's a criminal. Has been for decades." I leaned forward, heart pounding. "Tell me everything." "Let's start with her late husband, Bradley's father. He died 10 years ago, officially from a heart attack, but I found medical records that tell a different story." She pulled out a thick folder. "He had no history of heart disease. He was healthy, active, regular checkups, all clear. Then suddenly, at 58, he drops dead. The death certificate was signed by a doctor who happened to be Eleanor's close friend. A doctor who lost his medical license 3 years later for signing false documents." "You think she killed him?" "I think it's worth investigating, especially when you see what happened immediately after his death. Eleanor inherited everything, a fortune worth roughly $400 million. But here's the interesting part. 3 months before he died, her husband had drafted a new will. This one would have put most of his assets in trust for Bradley and his sister, with Eleanor receiving only a small portion. That will was never filed. The lawyer who drafted it died in a car accident 2 weeks after the husband's death. My blood ran cold. Eleanor killed them both. Can't prove it yet, but the pattern is there. 2 convenient deaths, enormous financial benefit to Eleanor, and suspicious circumstances around both. Patricia pulled out another folder. Then there's Bradley's sister, Catherine. She was 25 when their father died, working as a teacher in Boston. According to family friends, she and Eleanor had a terrible fight after the funeral. Catherine accused Eleanor of manipulating their father, of stealing money from him before he died. She threatened to contest the will. What happened to her? She disappeared 6 months later. Just vanished. Her apartment was left undisturbed, her car still parked on the street, her bank accounts untouched. The police investigated briefly, but found nothing. Eleanor told everyone Catherine had mental health issues, that she'd probably run away to start over somewhere. Eventually, the case went cold. I felt sick. Do you think Eleanor killed her too? I think Catherine knew too much and became a liability. Patricia's expression was hard. I've been looking for her for 2 days. No credit card usage, no tax returns, no social media presence, no record of her anywhere for the past 10 years. Either she's living completely off the grid with a new identity, or she's dead. My money's on dead. The room felt colder. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to process what I was hearing. I'd known Eleanor was cruel, greedy, manipulative. But murder? Multiple murders? And Bradley? Did he know? Had he helped his mother kill his own father and sister? There's more, Patricia said quietly. Eleanor's been running a sophisticated fraud operation for years. Shell companies, offshore accounts, money laundering schemes. She's been stealing from charities she chairs, embezzling from estates she's been appointed to manage, running insurance scams. I found evidence of at least 20 separate criminal enterprises. We're talking hundreds of millions in stolen money. She opened her laptop and showed me spreadsheets, bank transfers, forged documents. The scope of Eleanor's criminal activity was staggering. She'd been operating with impunity for decades, protected by her social status, and carefully cultivated relationships with wealthy, powerful people who never suspected the elegant society woman was robbing them blind. How did no one catch this before? She's brilliant at it. Every scheme is separated from the others, run through different networks, different identities. She has people working for her who don't even know they're working for her. And she's got dirt on enough powerful people to ensure their silence if they ever figured it out. Patricia pulled out another file. Including 3 judges, 2 state senators, and a federal prosecutor. I found evidence of blackmail, bribery, and coercion going back 15 years. I stared at the evidence spread across my table. This wasn't just about my attempted murder anymore. This was a massive criminal conspiracy that had been operating in plain sight for decades. Eleanor had destroyed lives, stolen fortunes, possibly committed multiple murders, and she'd gotten away with all of it because she knew how to manipulate the system and the people who ran it. We need to take this to the FBI, I said. Not the local office. This is too big. We need someone who can investigate without Eleanor's connections interfering. Patricia nodded. I already reached out to a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime division in Washington. She's clean, untouchable, has a reputation for taking down powerful criminals. She's interested, but she needs more than what we have. We need someone inside Eleanor's operation to testify, someone who can verify these documents and explain how the schemes worked. Who? Bradley, Patricia said simply. He's been helping his mother for years. He knows where all the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. If we can flip him, get him to testify against Eleanor in exchange for a reduced sentence, we can take her down. I felt something twist in my chest. Bradley had tried to kill me. He deserved to rot in prison for the rest of his life. The thought of offering him any kind of deal made me want to scream. But if it meant destroying Eleanor, exposing everything she'd done, bringing justice for Catherine and all her other victims. "Set up a meeting with his lawyer," I said finally. "Let's see if Bradley values his freedom more than his mother." Patricia smiled coldly. "This is going to be fun." The meeting happened 2 days later in Gregory's office. Bradley's lawyer, a nervous man named Theodore who clearly knew his client was guilty, sat across from us looking uncomfortable. Gregory laid out our proposal. Bradley would provide detailed testimony about Eleanor's criminal operations, help the FBI build cases against her co-conspirators, and cooperate fully with the investigation into his father's death and sister's disappearance. In exchange, we'd recommend a reduced sentence on the attempted murder charge, 15 years instead of life, with possibility of parole. Theodore consulted with Bradley for an hour in a conference room. I waited in Gregory's office, drinking coffee and trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. I didn't want Bradley to get any kind of deal. I wanted him to suffer. But Patricia was right. Without someone inside Eleanor's organization, we might never be able to prove everything she'd done. She was too good at covering her tracks. Finally, Theodore returned. "Bradley agrees to your terms. He'll testify against his mother and provide whatever evidence you need. But he has one additional condition." "What condition?" Gregory asked sharply. "He wants to speak with Lindsay. Alone. Just 5 minutes." I felt my hands clench into fists. "Absolutely not." "It's non-negotiable," Theodore said. "If you want his cooperation, he needs to say something to you first. He insists it's important." Patricia started to object, but I held up a hand. "Fine, 5 minutes. But you're staying in the room the entire time, Patricia. And if he tries anything, you have my permission to shoot him." She smiled grimly. "Gladly." They brought Bradley in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He looked terrible, thinner than I'd ever seen him, dark circles under his eyes, his usually perfect hair unwashed and disheveled. Prison was not agreeing with him. Good. Patricia stood by the door, hand resting casually on her weapon. Gregory sat beside me, legal pad ready. Bradley took the seat across from us, his handcuffs clinking against the metal table. For a long moment he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. "You have 5 minutes," I said coldly. "Say whatever you need to say." "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "Lindsay, I'm so sorry for everything. I know that doesn't mean anything now. I know I can never take back what I did. But I need you to know. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this." I felt rage bubble up in my chest. "You pushed me off a yacht into shark-infested waters. You whispered, 'Enjoy the swim with the sharks,' in my ear while you did it. What part of that didn't involve wanting to hurt me?" "It was my mother," he said desperately, leaning forward. "She's been controlling me my entire life. She planned everything. The marriage, the theft, the murder. I was just following her orders, like I always have. She made me believe it was the only way, that you'd never give us what we needed, that this was justified somehow. But I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I'm sorry." "You're not sorry you tried to kill me," I said, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. "You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." Bradley flinched like I'd slapped him. "That's not true. I've been thinking about this every day since they arrested me. About what I did to you. How terrified you must have been in that water. I can't sleep. I keep seeing your face when I pushed you. The betrayal in your eyes. It's destroying me." "Good," I said flatly. "You should be destroyed. You tried to murder me for money. You married me, pretended to love me for 5 years, all while planning to rob me and leave me dead. Whatever torment you're experiencing now is nothing compared to what you deserve." Tears started running down his face. Real tears, I noticed with some surprise. I'd never seen Bradley cry before. I know I deserve everything that's happening to me. But my mother doesn't get to walk away from this. She's been manipulating me since I was a child, using me to commit crimes, threatening me when I tried to resist. She killed my father, Lindsay, and my sister Catherine. She killed her too. I helped cover it up because I was too scared to say no to her, but I can't keep living with that guilt. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Why should I believe anything you're saying? You're facing life in prison. Of course you'd blame your mother and play the victim. Because I have proof, he said urgently. I've been documenting everything for years. Every crime, every scheme, every murder. I kept files hidden in places my mother doesn't know about. Insurance in case she ever tried to throw me under the bus. I was planning to use them to escape her someday, to start over somewhere she couldn't reach me. But now I want to use them to destroy her. Gregory leaned forward, interested despite himself. What kind of files? Financial records, recordings of conversations where she admits to crimes, evidence about my father's murder, letters my mother wrote to the doctor who falsified the death certificate, discussing payment for his cooperation, information about Catherine's disappearance, including a recording of my mother admitting she had Catherine killed and where the body is buried. Bradley's voice was shaking now. I can give you everything. Every person she's blackmailed, every crime she's committed, every skeleton in her closet. I can hand you my mother's entire operation and watch it burn, but I need something in return. You're already getting a deal, I said. 15 years instead of life. I don't mean the sentence reduction. I mean protection. Bradley glanced at Patricia, then back to me. My mother has connections everywhere. If she finds out I'm testifying against her, she'll have me killed. I need witness protection, a new identity after I serve my time, enough money to disappear somewhere she'll never find me. That's what I want in exchange for destroying her. The room was silent. I looked at Gregory, who was scribbling notes furiously. Patricia had her arms crossed, expression skeptical but thoughtful. You realize if you're lying, Patricia said quietly. If you lead us on a wild goose chase and waste our time with fake evidence, your deal disappears and you go back to facing life in prison for attempted murder. I'm not lying. Bradley met her gaze steadily. I've hated my mother for years. She's made my entire life a nightmare. This is my chance to finally be free of her, even if it means spending 15 years in a cell first. It's worth it. I wanted to feel something for him. Pity, anger, vindication. But all I felt was empty. This man had been my husband. I'd shared my life with him, trusted him, believed we had a future together. Now he was just another criminal making deals to save himself. And I couldn't find it in me to care about his suffering. Give us the evidence, I said finally. All of it. If it checks out, if you cooperate fully with the FBI investigation and testify against your mother, I'll make sure you get your witness protection. But if you're playing us, Bradley, I will personally ensure you never see daylight again. Understood? He nodded rapidly. Understood. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for... Don't. I cut him off. Don't thank me. Don't apologize again. Just do what you promised and maybe, eventually, you can live with yourself. I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Get him out of here. As guards led Bradley away, I turned to Gregory and Patricia. Tell me we can trust him. His story checks out so far, Patricia said. I'll need to verify the evidence he's promising, but if he really has recordings of Eleanor admitting to murder, this case just got a lot bigger. We're not just talking about your attempted murder anymore. We're talking about taking down a serial killer and organized crime operation. Gregory nodded agreement. The FBI will jump at this. Eleanor's made powerful enemies over the years, people she's blackmailed or stolen from who'd love to see her go down. With Bradley's testimony and evidence, we can build an airtight case. I looked out Gregory's office window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Eleanor was walking free, probably planning her next move, confident she could manipulate her way out of trouble like she always had. She had no idea what was coming. Set it up, I said. Whatever the FBI needs, Whatever resources they want, I'll provide it. I want Eleanor in prison for the rest of her life. I want her to die there, alone and forgotten, with everyone knowing exactly what kind of monster she was." Patricia smiled. "That can be arranged." 2 weeks later, the FBI arrested Eleanor at a charity gala. They dragged her out in handcuffs in front of 500 of Miami's wealthiest and most influential people. The look on her face, shock, rage, humiliation, was captured by dozens of photographers and made the front page of every newspaper in the country. The investigation moved quickly after that. Bradley kept his word, providing mountains of evidence and detailed testimony about his mother's crimes. Catherine's body was found exactly where Bradley said it would be, buried on a property Eleanor owned in the Everglades. Forensic evidence confirmed she'd been murdered, strangled, then her body dissolved in acid to destroy evidence. The medical examiner said she'd been dead approximately 10 years, right around the time she disappeared. The evidence about Bradley's father was equally damning. Eleanor had poisoned him slowly over 6 months, using a toxin that mimicked the symptoms of heart disease. The doctor who'd signed the false death certificate was arrested and immediately flipped, providing his own testimony about Eleanor's involvement. He'd been blackmailed into cooperating. Eleanor had evidence of medical malpractice he'd committed and threatened to expose him unless he helped cover up the murder. The embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering cases were equally straightforward. Bradley's files included detailed records of every scheme, every victim, every dollar stolen. Prosecutors started building cases against Eleanor's co-conspirators, many of whom quickly accepted plea deals in exchange for testifying against her. Her carefully constructed criminal empire collapsed like a house of cards. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later. Eleanor refused all plea negotiations, insisted she was innocent, claimed Bradley was lying about everything to reduce his own sentence. Her lawyers tried every trick in the book to get evidence suppressed or charges dismissed. Nothing worked. I prepared myself for the ordeal ahead. Months of testimony, media coverage, public scrutiny of the most traumatic experience of my life. But I was ready, because this time, I wouldn't be fighting alone. The trial began on a humid Monday morning in September. The courthouse was surrounded by media trucks and protesters, some supporting me, others bizarrely defending Eleanor, convinced she was being framed by a vindictive daughter-in-law. I walked through the crowd with Patricia at my side, ignoring the shouted questions and camera flashes. Inside, the courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and the families of Eleanor's other victims who'd come to see justice served. Eleanor sat at the defense table looking impeccable in a tailored navy suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression serene and confident. She glanced at me as I entered, and for just a moment, I saw pure hatred flash across her face before she schooled it back into benign innocence. Her lawyers flanked her, a team of expensive attorneys who specialized in defending wealthy criminals. They were good, but they were facing an impossible case. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the full scope of Eleanor's crimes. Attempted murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder for her husband and daughter, multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and racketeering. The assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Victoria, methodically explained how Eleanor had spent decades building a criminal empire while hiding behind a facade of respectability. She promised the jury that by the end of the trial, they would see Eleanor for what she truly was, a remorseless killer who destroyed anyone who stood in her way. Eleanor's lead attorney, a man named Harrison, who'd made his fortune defending white-collar criminals, countered with a different narrative. He painted Eleanor as a grieving mother being persecuted by a vengeful daughter-in-law. He claimed I'd orchestrated this entire prosecution out of spite, that Bradley's testimony was coerced and unreliable, that the evidence was circumstantial at best. He asked the jury to see Eleanor as she really was, a devoted mother, a pillar of the community, a charitable woman who dedicated her life to helping others. I sat in the gallery watching this performance, feeling my anger build with every word. Harrison was good. He made Eleanor sound almost sympathetic. But I knew Victoria was better, and the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 weeks. They called forensic experts who'd examined Catherine's remains and confirmed she'd been murdered. They called the doctor who'd falsified Bradley's father's death certificate, who testified tearfully about Eleanor's threats and blackmail. They called victims of Eleanor's fraud schemes, elderly people whose retirement savings she'd stolen, charities she'd embezzled from, business partners she'd destroyed. Each witness added another layer to the portrait of Eleanor as a calculating predator. Bradley testified on day 12. He looked different from the last time I'd seen him. Prison had aged him, carved lines into his face that hadn't been there before. He walked to the witness stand with his head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially Eleanor. When he finally looked at his mother, I saw fear in his eyes. Even now, even here, she terrified him. Victoria led him through his testimony carefully. Bradley described growing up under Eleanor's control, how she'd groomed him from childhood to help her commit crimes. He talked about watching his father deteriorate from poison, not understanding what was happening until it was too late. He described the night Eleanor told him she'd had Catherine killed, how she'd threatened to frame him for the murder if he ever spoke about it. His voice broke multiple times, and I saw several jurors wipe their eyes. Then he testified about me, about how Eleanor had targeted me specifically because of my wealth, how she'd instructed him to court me, marry me, gain my trust. He admitted she'd planned my murder for over a year, waiting for the perfect opportunity. He described the morning on the yacht, how Eleanor had coached him on what to say, how to push me without leaving bruises that would show up in an autopsy. He cried when he recounted pushing me overboard, watching me struggle in the water, hearing Eleanor's laughter as they sailed away. I knew it was wrong, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I knew it was murder, but I was too afraid of my mother to say no. I've been afraid of her my entire life. Harrison's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked Bradley's credibility, suggested he was lying to get a reduced sentence, pointed out the plea deal he'd accepted. But Bradley held firm. He had evidence to back up everything he said, recordings, documents, bank records. Harrison couldn't shake his testimony. I was called to the stand on day 15. Walking past Eleanor felt surreal. This woman had tried to have me killed, and now I was sitting 20 feet away from her, about to help send her to prison for the rest of her life. Victoria's questions were straightforward. I described my marriage to Bradley, the trip on the yacht, the moment he pushed me overboard. I talked about treading water, watching them sail away, the certainty that I was going to die. What went through your mind in that moment? Victoria asked gently. That I'd been such a fool, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions roiling inside me. That I'd trusted someone who never loved me, who only saw me as a source of money, and that if I survived, I was going to make sure they paid for what they'd done. Harrison's cross-examination tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife exaggerating events, but the GPS data from the yacht, the medical records from my rescue, the recordings I'd made of Bradley and Eleanor, all of it supported my testimony. He couldn't break me. The prosecution rested after 3 weeks. Eleanor's defense lasted 2 days. Harrison called character witnesses who testified about Eleanor's charitable work and community involvement, but Victoria dismantled each one on cross-examination, showing how Eleanor had used those same charities to launder stolen money. Eleanor herself didn't testify. Too risky, given the evidence against her. Closing arguments happened on a Friday. Victoria's was powerful and clear, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every crime, every victim. Harrison's was desperate, asking the jury to ignore the facts and focus on reasonable doubt that didn't exist. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict, my heart started racing. Patricia squeezed my hand as we stood for the jury to enter. I watched their faces, trying to read their expressions, but they were carefully neutral. The forewoman, a middle-aged teacher named Helen, held the verdict form with steady hands. On the count of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. Eleanor's face went white. Harrison put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook him off. On the count of murder in the first degree and the death of Catherine Wells, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. A sound escaped Eleanor's throat, something between a gasp and a moan. In the gallery, I saw people who'd known Catherine crying, holding each other. On the count of murder in the first degree and the death of Robert Wells, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. The guilty verdicts continued. Every count of fraud, every count of embezzlement, every count of money laundering and racketeering. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 23 counts total, each one another nail in Eleanor's coffin. By the end, she was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white, her perfect composure finally cracking. The judge thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. As the bailiff moved to take Eleanor back into custody, she finally lost control. She lunged toward me, screaming, "This is all your fault! You destroyed my family! You should have died in that ocean like you were supposed to!" Guards grabbed her before she could reach me, but her words echoed through the courtroom. Several journalists captured video of her outburst. It would be all over the news within an hour, destroying any remaining sympathy people might have had for her. Outside the courthouse, I gave a brief statement to the press. Justice has been served today. Eleanor Wells is a murderer and a thief who destroyed countless lives over decades. I'm grateful to the jury for seeing through her lies and holding her accountable. My hope is that this verdict brings some measure of peace to all her victims and their families. Victoria stood beside me, professional and satisfied. This was one of the most comprehensive prosecutions I've ever been part of. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury made the right decision. Eleanor Wells will spend the rest of her life in prison, where she belongs. The sentencing hearing 2 weeks later was almost anticlimactic. The judge, a stern woman named Barbara, who'd presided over the trial with firm efficiency, listened to victim impact statements for 3 hours. Families of people Eleanor had defrauded spoke about losing their life savings. Catherine's former colleagues talked about the promising young teacher whose life was cut short. I gave my own statement, describing the terror of being pushed into the ocean and the betrayal of discovering my husband's true intentions. Eleanor remained silent throughout, her face a mask of controlled rage. When the judge finally asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she stood and addressed the courtroom. "I have spent my entire life building something meaningful, creating a legacy, supporting my family. Everything I did was to protect my son and ensure our future. I will not apologize for being a strong woman in a world that punishes strength. History will remember me differently than this court does today." It was a stunning display of narcissism and delusion. Even her own lawyers looked uncomfortable. The judge's expression didn't change. "Eleanor Wells, you have been convicted of 23 separate felonies, including 2 counts of first-degree murder. You have shown no remorse, no understanding of the pain you've caused, no recognition that your actions were wrong. You are a danger to society and will remain so for the rest of your life." Judge Barbara's voice was ice-cold. "On the murder charges alone, I am sentencing you to 2 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Additional sentences on the fraud and embezzlement charges will run concurrently. You will die in prison, and that is more mercy than you showed your victims." Eleanor swayed on her feet. For the first time since her arrest, she looked her age, frail and defeated. The guards led her away in handcuffs. She didn't look back. Bradley's sentencing happened a month later. True to the plea agreement, he received 15 years with possibility of parole after serving 10. The judge noted his cooperation with prosecutors and genuine remorse, but also emphasized that he'd participated in serious crimes including attempted murder. He was led away to begin his sentence, and I felt nothing watching him go. He'd made his choices. Now he'd live with the consequences. The civil suits came next. I sued both Bradley and Eleanor for the $15 million they'd stolen, plus damages for emotional distress, attempted murder, and fraud. Eleanor's assets were seized. The house, the cars, the art collection, everything. It barely covered what she'd stolen from all her victims. But it was something. The funds were distributed through a victim compensation program, ensuring everyone she'd defrauded received at least partial restitution. Bradley had nothing to seize. All his assets had come from Eleanor or from stealing from me. But the judgment would follow him after his release, making it nearly impossible for him to rebuild any kind of life. That seemed fitting. The media attention finally died down after 6 months. My company's stock had recovered, and then some. Investors viewed me as a survivor, someone who couldn't be broken. Diana joked that I was now unkillable in business negotiations, and she wasn't entirely wrong. No one wanted to cross the woman who'd survived murder and destroyed her attackers so completely. A year after the trial, I stood on the deck of a new yacht, this one purchased with my own money, registered in my name alone, equipped with the best security systems money could buy. Patricia was with me, along with Diana and Gregory. We were celebrating the close of a major business deal, my company's acquisition of a competitor that would make us the largest biotech firm on the East Coast. To Lindsay, Diana said, raising her glass of champagne, who refuses to let anyone or anything keep her down. We drank, and I felt something warm in my chest that had been absent for too long. Peace. Not complete. I still had nightmares sometimes about the ocean, about Bradley's hands on my back, but getting better. How does it feel? Patricia asked quietly, knowing they're both locked away. I considered the question. Satisfying, I admitted. Eleanor will die in prison. She'll never hurt anyone else. Bradley will spend the next decade thinking about what he did, what he lost. That's justice. I paused. But it doesn't erase what happened. I still have to live with the fact that I married someone who tried to kill me, that I didn't see it coming. You couldn't have known, Gregory said firmly. They were professional con artists. Eleanor had been doing this for decades. You weren't their first victim, just their most dangerous one. That was true. The FBI's investigation had uncovered 6 other people Eleanor had targeted over the years. Wealthy individuals she'd befriended, manipulated, and robbed. 2 of them had died under suspicious circumstances that were now being reinvestigated. I'd been lucky. My survival had exposed her before she could destroy more lives. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but curiosity made me open it. I'm sorry for everything. I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But I needed you to know. I did love you, at least at first. Before my mother twisted everything. I hope you find happiness. B. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Bradley could spend the rest of his life seeking absolution. I wasn't going to give it to him. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive. Everything okay? Diana asked, noticing my expression. Just deleting the past, I said, putting my phone away. Tell me about the new research project you mentioned. She launched into an excited description of a promising cancer treatment our team was developing. I listened, genuinely engaged, thinking about the future instead of dwelling on the past. This was what mattered. The work we were doing, the lives we were saving, the company I'd built with my own hands and refused to let anyone take from me. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I watched the waves and felt none of the fear I'd expected. The ocean had almost killed me, but I wouldn't let that memory steal this from me too. I'd reclaimed everything Bradley and Eleanor had tried to take. My company, my fortune, my peace of mind, even my ability to enjoy being on the water. You know what the best part is? I said suddenly, interrupting Diana's technical explanation. They thought they could break me. Eleanor thought she could manipulate me, steal from me, kill me, and get away with it because she'd gotten away with everything else. Bradley thought he could betray me and face no consequences. They both underestimated me completely. Their fatal mistake, Patricia said with satisfaction. Literally, Gregory added, and we all laughed. We stayed on the yacht until midnight, talking and drinking and celebrating not just the business deal, but everything we'd survived and overcome. When I finally went home to my house, the one Eleanor and Bradley had tried to steal, I felt genuinely content for the first time in over a year. Eleanor Wells died in prison 6 years later from a stroke. She was 74. The prison warden said she'd been a difficult inmate, constantly demanding special treatment and insisting she didn't belong there. No one mourned her. Her funeral was attended by a single court-appointed representative and the prison chaplain. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery, her name and legacy reduced to nothing but a cautionary tale about greed and narcissism. Bradley served his full 15-year sentence. His request for early parole was denied 3 times. Upon his release, he entered witness protection with a new identity, per his agreement. I never heard from him again, and I was grateful for that silence. He disappeared into obscurity, which seemed like the appropriate ending for someone who'd lived his entire life under his mother's shadow. As for me, I rebuilt my life into something stronger than before. My company went from strength to strength, developing treatments that saved lives and pushing the boundaries of medical science. I never remarried. Once was enough. But I found fulfillment in my work, my friendships, and the knowledge that I'd faced the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged victorious. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about those moments in the ocean, treading water and watching the yacht sail away. But instead of fear, I feel pride. I survived. I fought back. And I won. That's the only revenge that truly matters.